being part of this conversation. The conversation is part of a consultation process from C20 for Seva, the Sense of Service. And part of this today, we are going to be hosting two colloquiums. Today is colloquium 1, tomorrow will be colloquium 2. The title for the colloquium is Building a Culture of Volunteering and Exploring the Models that Enrich This. So our hope is bringing together all these people. We're able to deep dive, churn, and find out some insights that we're able to take forward to put together as recommendations from C20 for how do we deepen the spirit of service and Seva. Wisdom Tree is knowledge partner for this process with Seva International, and we're happy to be hosting this whole consultation process. And I'd like to pass it to the moderator for today, Abhishek Thakur. Over to you, Abhishek.
All right. Namaste, everybody. Namaste. Abhishek, part of the Wisdom Tree team, also part of this larger family that is all of us, family of people who choose to do what we choose to do, I guess. Today's panel and tomorrow's panel I want to set them in a global context, because the broader context of this is India's G20 presidency. And from there, wherever G20 happens, there's also C20, which is a civil society process initiated actually by the civil society, owned by the civil society. And technically without the necessary blessings of anybody else, it's civil society coming together to say we're the civil society of G20 nations. And so we'll constitute ourselves. There are philanthropy, and as a part of it, our intent really is to bring out this idea of seva, this distinction of seva, and take it to a global audience. What constitutes seva? What are the different models? And really, as an Indian offering to the world, to say that this is one of the ways that we do things. That's really the hope. That's the intent. Is it only exclusively Indian? We don't know. Is it uniquely us? Only is our ways the only ways? We don't know, but we're happy to explore and see what comes out of this. So that's the broad intent of the conversation. I'm really privileged to have amazing practitioners from the field who have thought about these things, lived these things over a long period of time of their lives. The way this panel will go is I'll introduce the speaker who's coming in. So we'll open with opening remarks from each of you. And from there, I'll request speakers to amplify, build on something that somebody else has shared in case something resonates and so on. And then we'll open into a free-flowing conversation of sorts. So it's really we'll start fairly open-ended and then see where there are convergences, where there are patterns. I'll invite you to reflect on your experiences, on your past realizations and thought processes and so on. So that's really the plan. I was planning in the sequence, and sequence is flexible, but I thought I'll propose a sequence. So I was planning to begin with Rajni, and then bring in Jitin, then bring in Shalabh, and then bring in Prabha. If that is fine, then we could go in that order. And it's just an intuitive feeling of how the conversation might flow. So if that is okay, and yes, welcome to the audience here also for listening in. We're live on multiple platforms right now. Yeah, so looking forward to that. So let's begin with Rajni. Rajni is a Mumbai-based freelance journalist and author. For me, I remember her most as an inspiration for the movie Swadesh. I have to say this. In Swadesh, when I saw Rajni Bakshi being acknowledged at the start, her book being acknowledged, I'm like, I know her, and Rajni is a former Gandhi Peace Fellow. She writes extensively in newspapers. And really, I see you as a thinker around contemporary issues, around culture, around politics, around the Indian ways. So yeah, it's such a privilege to have you, Rajni. And since you bring such a rich context of history with you, I thought it would be great to start with you and have some of your initial reflections on Seva, volunteering.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including me in this wonderful gathering, Abhishek, Kejal, Ashok, all of you. So I think in this first round, we all get about 3 minutes, 4 minutes.
Let's do 3 to 5 minutes, just a few key initial remarks, and then we open up.
Yes. So, I hope that most people who are listening have had a chance to see the very good note that this group has put together on the subject. And so one of the things which the note says is that there are different forms of seva, and one kind is driven by guilt. So actually, since you asked me the question about our traditional frame, etc., I am not sure if I can recall any instance in our traditional frame, of a guilt-driven seva. It's mostly duty. Now, and that is actually a far more important, I think, area for us to focus on. And I'm hoping that this discussion later on will, touch upon that. And because we know it's a controversial topic these days, when you emphasize duties, not over rights, but along with rights. And so I see seva in that context of being one feature of our social self, how we express our wider self in the samaj. So can we slip into a bit of Hindi? Is that okay?
Yes, we should be fine, I think.
हाँ, so I know कि ये पूरा प्लेटफॉर्म जो है वो सिविल सोसाइटी के नाम से कहा जा रहा है, लेकिन मेरा मानना ये है कि जो हमारे यहाँ का जो समाज शब्द है और उससे जो हम समझते हैं, वो ये सिविल सोसाइटी टर्मिनोलॉजी से ज्यादा व्यापक है, ज्यादा गहरा है, और it has much more nuance and substance. So that's one thing I wanted to clarify. So at the level of samaj, I just want to make 2 points in this opening moment. That देखिए सेवा हम बहुत अलग अलग motivations या inspiration से करते हैं. For me, the larger issue is that when we do service, are we also cultivating an awareness of why the problem exists in the first place? Because globally, there is a culture of doing good work to help other people without necessarily questioning why those people need help in the first place. So and that's why I'm hoping that in the later discussion, I'll have a chance to talk more about trusteeship. Because trusteeship is not merely about sharing my wealth. It is about realizing that no wealth is ever fully private. Why? Because all wealth is earned because of the innumerable gifts that Samaj provides. The very stability and the existence of Samaj, which is not perfect. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not implying that at any point in history, Samaj is not a perfect entity. But it is the only ground on which we can work towards better and better self, individual self and shared Samaj self. The second point that I picked up in your note I want to highlight here is, you said that the origins of seva are in the awareness of divinity. Well, definitely, I think hamare yahan, is subcontinent mein, the awareness of the divinity of all life is a great gift. It's a civilizational strength and gift. Lekin I just want to suggest that ये जो awareness of divinity है ना, long before that, in our survival struggle, I'm talking say maybe 1.5, 2 lakh years ago, when maybe we didn't even have this form, our ancestors didn't look like this. Mutuality and cooperation is what got us to this point. So I feel that what today we call seva maybe takes its richest form when it is drawing on those qualities that are innate to our species, cooperation and mutuality. And I'll close by highlighting that this is very beautifully expressed by the Africans. I'm not quite sure which African language this word comes from, but it has now become global currency. It's become a globally known term, Ubuntu, which means You are, therefore I am. ये जो म्यूचुअलिटी है, आप हो तभी मैं भी संभव हूं. To me, this is at the heart of all concerns or all aspirations that we call seva. And this, I feel, is what Gandhiji was. This is the thread that Gandhiji picked up when he coined the term Sarvodaya. So net, what I'm suggesting or requesting us to consider is that seva seva nahi hai agar wo sarvodaya ke laksh pe nahi lagi. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Rajni. Yeah, I think you're already opening up several rich threads, as you always do. But I think I'm going to request the other speakers to share their initial remarks, because it can get very tempting to respond to. But it will be great to have original opening remarks and then maybe start building on each other, so that
please, we'll have time. We have a lot of time for this.
We have space to go into it. So on that note of Sarvodaya, and I think related to that, even Antodaya, if I have to take that, I move to Jitin. Jitin's been working for children in need of care and protection since the age of 19 as the founder of Make a Difference, and still on the same purpose, on the same journey. Over time, thousands of young people have walked in and out through Make a Difference, giving their time, energy, effort to making the lives of children better. Jitin not only is a founder, but it's also a leader in the social sector, having won several awards, fellowships, and just an inspiring figure for us all, I guess, all around. So Jitin, over to you, having seen such an extensive range of service seva happening, and all in a single domain, which is children in need of care and protection. What are some of your reflections around seva?
Thank you, Abhishek, for that nice introduction. I was not expecting that at all. After listening to Rajni speak, I was kind of hoping that I did not have to be a participant in this. I could just listen, because it will be because having to think about, because there were moments where I was kind of like, oh, I need to think about what I need to say and not get lost in the amazing conversation that you are having, Rajni. And I would love to listen to this conversation more, is where I am. But just to kind of give my thoughts on volunteering and seva, I would like to approach it from the other end of the spectrum, where I look at seva not as an end in itself. I believe that seva has to create value to the other human being, to the world, and because it is possible to engage in seva and actually nothing really change also. And that has also been my experience. And then we can always talk about how that is not seva that is coming from an inner transformation, and hence we need to focus on more inner transformative change. But then so the question that I'm kind of, what has helped me is that, how do you know that the inner transformation has happened when that outer transformation has happened? Then the outer transformation is measurable and you can see it. So what is that outer transformation that we can focus on as a yardstick to kind of measure? And I don't believe that it is either or, it has to be both. And when it comes to this, and that's why I chose this one specific cause, which is children in need of care and protection, because it is how we can clearly measure what is kind of happening, and it is visible. That's on one side. And the other side part of the question is about what is India's contribution to it. And Rajni beautifully spoke about the history of it, right? And I fully believe in it. I'm grateful to be part of that culture, and it gives me immense pride. But on the other hand, I would like to kind of bring in what has modern India brought into this service. I like to believe that the work that Bhumi, MAD, I volunteer, you and I, there are a lot of very young organizations out there in India right now that is actively defining volunteering for the current time. And what is that contribution is something that's kind of alive for me. So keeping both of this in mind, I like to, like where we come from and Make a Difference, we like to believe that the number one problem, the root cause of almost all problems that exist globally is poverty, extreme poverty. That is why children end up in childcare institutions. That's most of the other problems that we talk about is kind of has its root in extreme poverty. And the reality is that today in India, it takes 7 generations for a child born into extreme poverty to break the cycle of poverty. And so that is something that we can clearly measure. When does somebody break the cycle of poverty? And there's data which says it takes 7 generations. Now, Make a Difference works 100% with volunteers on ground. And through that, we figured out a way on how to reduce it from 7 generations to something between 15 years to 18 years. We should be able to do this. And for me, there is one more line that I want to add here, which is that we really thought about it and we realized that there's a bunch of things that we are doing to enable that transition to happen, which is, according to us, the fastest way to transition a child out of poverty. And that can only be done using volunteers. A paid model cannot work in that space. So hence, my understanding is there are things that volunteering can deliver that other forms cannot deliver. And it can only be volunteering. And that is an important aspect, distinction that I wanted to kind of bring in, because volunteering has always been looked at as like the substitute. When you don't have enough resources on all the stuff, you use volunteering. While it's not a substitute, it is a core to real change happening in the world on one side. And when it comes to India's contribution to the volunteering space, this model that we have developed, we believe, is a way where a country can ensure that it can collectivize its most vulnerable people, and it can enable them to transition out of poverty, while parallelly enable the evolution of a consciousness of the entire population, and hence the overall country comes out of it. And I feel that globally we have been stuck in this cycle where the cycle of poverty as civilization has gotten stuck in a cycle of poverty, and Seva could be our way of breaking out the cycle of poverty and getting to a point where there is prosperity throughout. And thanks to the progress human beings have made from the space of AI, in the space of technology and things like that, I believe in our lifetime we can get to a point with Seva where the world will never be what it used to be, which is a space where some are thriving and the rest are struggling. And this could literally be the end of that paradigm. And that's what we are working towards.
Wow, beautiful. It makes me go amen. Tathastu, inshallah. Cheers to that thought, Jitin. And I've been fortunate to see the work on the ground that is moving towards this. It's inspiring. And from one inspiring person to another inspiring person, I'm very happy to have Shalabh after a while, connecting after a while on a panel. Shalabh's the co-founder of I Volunteer. And somehow for me, I don't see I Volunteer now as an organization. I see it as a conglomerate of several different large initiatives, whether it's India Fellows, JSW Fellows, Jobs for Good, a whole range of things that Shalabh's been able to consecutively expand and create, and a very broad set of Vyapak Jo Samaj, which Rajni was saying, getting the Samaj to volunteer in a real sense and across boundaries, across corporates, across the society. And it's such a massive and beautiful, inspiring initiative. So as a pioneer also, Shalabh sits on several committees on CII's India at 75, he's a faculty at SP Jain. So really not only a thought leader, I see Shalabh as also a serial innovator, I guess, who's kept on innovating and made I Volunteer the large platform that it is. So from Jitin, where the focus was on poverty and on one cause, I wanted to move to the other side, which I thought you bring in, which is getting the whole society engaged into this. And I'm curious about your thoughts around Seva. So over to you, Shalabh.
Abhishek, I think your beautiful introduction took half of my thoughts away already. I'm thinking what more to add. Yeah, but great to be on a platform again with you after a long while, and knowing some known people, Jitin, Prabhakar, and meeting for the first time, Rajniji. So fantastic conversation, and kind of, so I'll just straight into kind of, where we stand. And when we began I Volunteer way back in 2001, we had a simple kind of thought. We said that people change is the only real and lasting change. nothing can change in the country, nothing can change in the society unless people change and people bring about that change. Especially, people bringing about that change becomes far more important in a country like India because we are so vast, so diverse, with so many challenges, uh, and yet such great amount of potential that we simply have to bridge. And the bridge is what I volunteer intends to be. But it comes from that basic thing that people change the only real and lasting change. Um People also transcend the different key components, of of what we inhabit, whether it's the business, it's the society, it's the environment, it's the government, it's the politics, it's the sports, whatever it is. People are the common factor to all of them, and therefore, people are also the people who can, is also the entity which can actually build bridges between all of these different actors or influencers that play a certain key role. Um, so both people changing is important and people bringing about a change is important. Now, the way I volunteer operates in a little more business-like fashion is actually each of our programs has been traditionally modeled around people bringing about change. So, for example, when we began, the first thing was we said that there are enough good organizations in the country that are doing good work. There are a lot of good people. We believe the goodness of every person. Actually, we believe that everyone can volunteer, and we simply have to bring people with good intentions together with good organizations to have great work that is happening out there. But from there, kind of from that operational kind of a role of simply saying that we need to just bring people and organizations together to kind of exchange their skills, their time to be more productive for the society. From there, today in these 20 years journey, we've moved from outward to inward, um, which is saying that that like I think Jitin was saying that what can you measure? So we began with what can we measure, as an outside change. But today we are, I think, talking about what can we measure as an inside change. What changes within people. So after, let's say, the simplest of the activity, if we've done a very simple beach cleanup activity with thousands of volunteers have come up and cleaned the beach, what is the outcome at the end of it? The outcome could be the amount of muck that has been picked up. It could be the area covered that has been cleaned. It could be the number of people that have been involved. It could be the amount of hours that they have put in. Those are the typical markers that everyone kind of measures, and so do we. But we need to move from there to say, okay, of these people, did they get infected by the idea of two things? That I will not be a party to creating that problem in the first place. And secondly, can I be the virus which influences the people, that are around me to make sure that they don't become a party of the same problem once again? So that's the minimal thing that we can begin with. And that I do believe to some extent is measurable. And then we move from that to actually talking about what is a larger change that happens within people. And so we believe that, one of the other things that volunteering does beautifully is it brings people face to face with people, situations, societies, problems that they do not understand and they do not even know they exist. So, so if you're able to provide them that exposure and then force in some ways a reflection about how did they feel about that engagement, and what did they think about that engagement, and what will they do about that engagement, whether it is volunteering or not. Just that thinking aspect will probably instill some more of an inner transformation. Obviously, inner transformation is more difficult to gather. One of the other things I do want to talk about is, you people spoken about, are we the only one, and what are the different examples? So one example that is kind of taking shape more in India, it's an international one, grown about 11 years back and taking shape in India, is the Good Deeds Day. I would simply see that, what is seva? It is actually going and doing service, doing some good deed, helping somebody out there, doing some good. And the Good Deeds Day is also an expression of a very similar, very, very simple and similar kind of a thought. Global movement that is picking up now. Almost all the, many organizations in India kind of are taking this up as well. And so it doesn't come from India, it comes from outside. It is not called service, it is called good deeds. So How are we similar? How are we different? I think those are some of the other things. And I do believe that, like you mentioned, as I volunteer, we've kind of moved from different kind of programs that we have created. So the fellowship program that you mentioned are also a way for us to create those leaders of change. And I think all of the organizations, whether it is Make a Difference, or it is Bhumi, or the several organizations that are at the top of the volunteering game in the country, they actually create those volunteering leaders. And I feel that we have to create those people who those leaders who bring about change, because none of our organizations, all of our organizations put together, cannot bring about the change that some of these leaders that we create can bring about in the longer run. So yeah, so I think that's where I would stop it with one little thing, that one other core belief that I volunteers had is people must have choice about what they want to do, where they want to do, to what extent do they want to engage, in what form do they want to engage. But I think as I'm going through this discussion, I'm thinking that all of these are still very from an operational point of view. Maybe we should also start looking at from an internal transformation point of view, what choices can people make, or can they actually make a choice? So so yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Salav. That's ending on like a little bit of a cliffhanger, because there's so much there itself in the last part where you said, does internal transformation even have choices, and which direction? Maybe we'll meander there, maybe we won't, but thanks for sharing that. From here, I want to move to you, Prabha. Prabhakar is the full name, but we call Prabha. And Prabha has had more than a decade of experience in the social change space and across several different contexts, environment, education, volunteering. And as a part of Bhumi, I also see you not only as yourself, but also Bhumi the collective, right? Because to me, Bhumi also epitomizes collective leadership of all of you coming together with an audacious dream. I think Bhumi's dreams keep growing in terms of how many volunteers it wants to engage, and now it's reached to every Indian volunteering. And it's a beautiful, audacious dream that many people share. Prabha anchors the Catalyze vertical at Bhumi, and is extremely passionate about getting people to volunteer and consistently on target. So, Prabha, curious, because to me somehow Bhumi stands. Bhumi is a little bit of madness, a little bit of I volunteerness, and it has its own kind of direction. So just curious, what does Seva look like? What does volunteer look like for Bhumi? And over all these years, what has it been able to discern, figure out?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Abhishek. Really grateful, excited to be here. I think when I think of what we do, and it's a nice way to say we do a bit of what I volunteer does and a bit of what Matt does. But our vision has always been to make volunteering a natural habit. And as building off your thought from just picking a cause, I think the cause itself for us is that people in the country start acting, right? Like there are lakhs of youth today who are angered by what they see around, who are troubled by what they see around, right? And then how can Bhumi be a platform and truly lift that word of being a platform where somebody can kind of step on it, grow, create change, right? I think one of the fundamentals that we believe in is that it is a very natural process to volunteer, to create change, right? Also personally, because I come from also have a spiritual background of knowing some like foundations around Seva. One of the theories that very naturally resonates with me is that it's not a very effort process, right? Like if you see somebody struggling, if a human being is in their very natural state of existence and is centered and calm, it's a very natural point to say, I'm going to go and help them. It is not even like I need to put an effort to go and say, I want to now think about helping them, devise a strategy. So I think it's a very natural process. Somehow through the evolution of human beings, some of us kind of get away from being in that space of that naturally happening, and hence the need for a platform to be there. If everybody were naturally doing it, then we won't need this platform. But because there is a need to allow people to reconnect to who they truly are, to really experience, oh, this is who I am, this is who I can be, then I think a need for a platform comes into picture, a need for an ecosystem that allows them to do that act that is anyway natural to come around, right? So in that sense, what we always strive to do is to really ask, can this platform exist? Can this platform scale? Which is also why I think we've been able to today move to different programs different causes, different cities, and be able to scale with the volunteers, right? We don't fixate on saying only this is the only thing we'll do. We basically start by asking, what do the volunteers want to do? What is the most local team in Chennai? What do they want to do? And can the platform truly help them to do that work at scale, do that work in a sustainable way? So it's been beautiful to set it up that way, because it keeps it extremely open for the ecosystem to promote volunteering. What also, however, does is that it keeps it slightly very broad and diluted, right? With not necessarily perception of very focus in one thing. But it's been great to work an ecosystem which truly being a platform, and I think it's done a lot of magic. Our volunteers take us to places. Again, it's counter to the natural process, right? The system is only the people in the system. The volunteers can and should take us everywhere where there is need, and the need should decide what work gets done. So it's been beautiful to see how suddenly comes and says, I want to start a chapter in Bhopal, and then a chapter in Bhopal starts. Somebody says, I want to start a new program starts, and all these are volunteer. It's a beautiful to see how when a system is truly a platform, allows people to step in, kind of move things forward, magic happens through that person, through the ecosystem, and everything kind of scales, right? So that's one thought I wanted to put out there. And also going back to my connected thought of how do we really see this whole process of volunteering? I think Shalab started to touch upon it. There's a lot of transformation that truly happens in people when they volunteer, right? And how do we really bring that narrative around when we talk about seva, when we talk about volunteering? Like every lot of founders I know were volunteers one day, few years back, right? Like that day they picked up 0.5 kgs of waste, but then today, if that didn't happen, they wouldn't be here. So it's a very, very cumulative, additive process, and volunteering does a lot of shift internally that we can't even probably like quantify. Like Shalab was saying, you won't have to quantify, and even if you're going to, it won't be quantitatively big, but it's a lot of magic. And how can we capture that magic of what volunteering does to individuals, so that the country truly starts to believe in volunteering, put seva and volunteering at the forefront, are something I think we should start talking about. Third, probably a conflict or a dilemma I want to put out there is perceptionally, sometimes I think when you start thinking of problems, system thinkers start from the scale of the problem, right? They don't start from the person. They start from what is the magnitude of the problem out there, right? And then you say, to solve that bigger problem, how should I think about my solution, right? When it comes to volunteering, I think it sometimes I think it's a dilemma to say, how do we design volunteering systems for scale, keep elements like true organic willingness to contribute, the feeling of I am doing seva, while also allowing the systems to think scale, allowing the systems to think like possibly something like rigor, like is the impact deep. So how do we balance both? Is there a dichotomy? Is there a trade-off between keeping our seva and our volunteering ecosystem in the country to be very, very natural, organic, very heart-driven, while also being able to create impact at scale, impact up depth? Is a question I want to put out there and stuff.
Could we hold both, and how does that look like? Thanks, Prabha, for bringing us.
Yeah.
I think it'd be good to take a short pause, actually, because there's so much that's been shared, and the temptation panel discussions is to quickly hop in and say, okay, now who wants to say what? But I thought, since I'm a moderator, maybe I can invite a 30-second pause, and then invite whoever feels moved to pick something from someone else, something that resonated, something that even diverged. And yeah, naturally we can flow from there, if that is fine. Thank you. So yeah, anybody who feels moved on hearing someone else, maybe we start from there. Let's see where we head.
I had a bunch of thoughts, but I'm actually just curious on what is the goal of. I don't want to kind of like distract from the core purpose of this whole exercise. So if you could just share the goal that we have, then I will probably like keep my questions in that direction.
Thanks. Very Jitin thing also to say, okay, where is where is this going to be? And eventually, this is meant to be a part of a policy pack that gets presented to leaders of the G20 nations. Whatever we capture would become a page, a couple of pages in that, hopefully, with all our inputs. Our thought process was to keep this very exploratory rather than kind of rig it with our mental models. And actually look at what patterns start emerging when people share their thoughts. What are the overlaps? What are the divergences? So the nature of the panel is a much more exploratory panel with a free flow. But the reason for asking amplification resonances was to start seeing what are the overlaps, what beneath what we are saying, what are some similar, deeper kind of things that are being said. So roughly that. So in specific terms, yes, all this will be captured in terms of what kind of themes came up, and I'll come out as a paper. But yeah, at this moment, it's good to be playfully exploratory, I guess, and we'll see where it goes.
Fair enough. So then I shall focus on the overlap instead of the divergence, which is kind of
Both. Whatever gets evoked. Let's go for it.
Let
Yeah.
me start with the overlap anyway. I think that's fair. I think from an overlap, I think one conversation that's very clear is that the inner transformation is at the core of volunteering, and I here it almost feels it's obvious, but that's not. I have a wife who's from another country, and when I'm there, you don't look at inner transformation is not what they associate volunteering to, right? Or even when I started volunteering X number of years back, inner transformation was not the part of the conversation. So I think it was kind of beautiful to see how everybody is so aligned on this inner transformation as the central tenet of volunteering. So that's the convergence that I'm seeing, which I think is beautiful, and the fact that we don't need to convince that. But that being said, the two conversations worth bringing in would be, one is we are just going to do the volunteer sourcing campaign for this year. And one of the active feedback that was given to me is that, Jitin, keep all your spiritual conversations to yourself. As a young 18-year-old kid, it won't sell. We need to keep things much more simpler. And in fact, we are this year going with a theme which is focused on self-care, which is almost like the other end of the spectrum. Right. So how is it that there is an interesting conversation about how, if this is the core product that we are providing, but if that's not what people are explicitly asking for, so we almost need to sneak it into them in a lot of ways. Like, is that what is kind of happening, and is there something we can do about it? It's like there is no demand for inner transformation at this point of time amongst the young people, is probably one way to look at it. Probably just my understanding of it. At scale, I'm sure there are some components there. So that's one divergence that I noticed, and the other divergence is I'm slightly worried if the focus on inner transformation kind of becomes an excuse to not focus on the outer transformation. And this comes from I remember being part of an Aspen circle where I was in a group or in a circle with some 20 people who are all like business leaders. I think the CEO of Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, one of those places where they're like, really powerful men were all sitting around the circle, and they were having the exact same conversation about how we are powerless and all we can change is ourselves. And and I was like, what? It does no, it's not true. Like it's almost like you're kind of there is a lot that you can actually do beyond that. And where is that balance? Where are we using inner transformation as a way to not take responsibility of the larger world, or do we even have a responsibility, or is that your ego? And do I need to go and not transform a lot more to kind of truly understand the meaning of volunteering? Is probably true too. But those are my thoughts.
Thanks for that, Jitin.
Okay. Can I
Yeah,
go
sure.
ahead with some thoughts? Yeah. I just want to begin by responding to one thing that Jitin just mentioned, that is there demand, and when we began, um, I think the idea was that if there was enough demand, then probably just putting a platform, which was what I Volunteer originally wanted to be. We wanted to be an Naukri.com of the volunteering world. We said we will put together a nice platform. There's enough demand, things will take place. Didn't happen. Uh, It didn't happen for two reasons. Obviously there are a lot of other things also, but I think two major things. One is there is probably that lack of demand, and we are here to create that market. Each one of us, I think, is here to kind of creating that market. We believe there's potential. There's possibly a latent demand that needs to come above the level and be met thereafter. Also, I think even if there is demand, there's no understanding from people, there's no experience about having done something, or how do we engage themselves. So in fact, as I volunteer, I feel that we are we're the first port of call for the newbies, whether it's a newbie NGO or it's a newbie volunteer. Once they're seasoned, they actually don't need us, which is why we don't find volunteer leaders working for us and NGOs that are great at volunteer engagement working for us, which is a challenge for us as an organization. But that's the reality. That people, once they've evolved, they will move on. So just thinking on that demand aspect. But I was curious. Okay, so there are several thoughts that coming to my mind. The one thought I had was initially kind of thinking about the duty that was mentioned by Rajinji earlier right now. So is that a problem? Like I don't understand. Is that a problem? Should that be a problem? Because I think it's a must in a democracy. It's a must in a society. It's a must in a family. It's a must in a school. So why can't we lay more stress on duty? So I can't. Yeah. So it was difficult for me to understand that somebody could actually challenge duties, unless of course the duty becomes I don't know, in some way more regressive, or doesn't have the right intentions. And then my other bigger question that I've always kind of tried to answer, struggle of finding an answer, is that whether it is volunteering or seva, it is for whom is it? So seva for whom? Seva is or service is for myself, or is it for the society? Volunteering, is it so as an organization, when you do something, is it to help the volunteer? Is it to help the NGOs that we service, or the beneficiaries that they service in turn? And I think that's a question that I've always been kind of beaten around with, because I always felt that we always need to have the balance. We the market maker. We need to be the balance. But that's a question that we always struggle, and I wanted to understand what are other views around it. Yeah. So too many things, but.
Thanks, Salab. Yeah, over to you, Rajni, to clarify the duty point.
I will in a minute. I just wanted to wonder aloud if when we use the word demand here, perhaps we mean Khoj, search.
Yeah,
right? Because nobody can demand inner transformation, right? And also, the moment we use the word demand, we have put ourselves sort of in the marketplace. At least in our times, the term demand is generally appears, in the marketplace, and that has all kinds of implications, which maybe in this discussion we can bypass. Since I think we're on a good track, we can focus on some very direct things. In response to you, Salab, I was on the same page that you are. But when I brought in that little twist, what I meant was that there is a historical burden of there being so much emphasis on duties and many, many people having no rights, that in that correction, it may have, some people feel that there may be an overcorrection, and now the discourse only focuses on rights. So I was just referring to that, but I don't think we should, in this discussion, I think we can bypass that issue. No, I was wondering, since responding, Abhishek, to that very good query that Jitin made, since this is in the G20 context, I would be very interested in hearing all of you talk about the limitations of volunteering. In the sense that, since I noticed that everybody wants a larger picture to change. Right? Now, so let's really open that up. Can the larger picture change through volunteering? For example, I am 100% convinced that volunteering cannot get rid of poverty. Because the causes of poverty are structural. I understand that there is a problem when we only talk about structure and about macro this and macro that, and leave no room for the individual to make their specific and, direct contribution. But what is the dynamic between these two domains? I think that would be of interest in the context of G20, particularly when we know historically and in our times as we speak, that all volunteering is not towards progressive causes. Seva can happen in a context where the same platform is encouraging the doers of seva to hate another set of people, or to see large sections of society as their possible or real enemy. So seva in itself doesn't put you on a progressive and humanitarian or at least humane track. You can, and also that, and this is the most difficult vidammana, ab iski English kya hoti hai? Dilemma hi hoti hai shayad. That seva can happen in pockets of life. Okay. You can save a life here and then go out and participate in killing 5 people. And I'm not talking in generalities. I'm talking about a real experience of a friend whose family was saved by someone who did exactly that. I'm not going to tell you which situation. I don't want to vitiate the discussion. So I just want to, this is the pataka I want to leave in the discussion.
Thank you for the pataka, Rajni. I'm going to, before I come to you, Prabha, and then maybe Jitin also, I thought I'll also take my liberty as a moderator to kind of make a few observations and come in. I think for me, the word demand and then you recontextualizing it as coach was also how market language has penetrated our day-to-day language also, right? It's natural we talk in those terms.
Along with impact.
And without judging it to be right or wrong, I think I wanted to locate it in this late capitalism era, right? Where almost if I care, there is a price I have to pay to care. Either I get paid less or I buy a more expensive product, or the current configuration. I just wonder if caring is a luxury good, and those who can afford to care and those who can't afford to care, right? And I'm holding that question, so locating a little bit into the where capitalism stands, and also linking that to the structural forces and to the Goldman Sachs and McKinsey's and that the whole piece, right? And where does volunteering stand? Does it get commoditized? Does it get monetized or instrumentalized for causes which are not necessarily best for all? And the second, because also Prabha, you're the youngest, I think, in the panel, coming to you for also Gen Z, right? And the reason I wanted to bring that was because the whole kind of existential, absurdist, nihilistic worldview where everything's going crazy together, this whole everything everywhere all at once kind of world, right? And exposure to that, and I'm wondering in that kind of a world where lesser and lesser things start making sense, is volunteering the lifeline, or is volunteering also just one more blah thing that I do, or I do just for going on Facebook and so on? So some of those questions, and I'm trying to also not bring this into right and wrong. And therefore, Rajni, I think for the purposes of our conversation, it is important to distinguish seva as well as one that is humanity-wide seva. And I think some of that distinction will also bound the conversation into saying we're talking about that aspect. Though I'm also equally tempted to bring out the whole, is active citizenship not a form of seva when I raise questions and so on? So is that also seva? Because that can be done by citizens, that can't be done by employees. So I mean, so there's a whole rich set of conversations. I know I'm throwing and opening all of these up. But Prabha, over to you with all these inputs and your original thoughts.
Sure. I think as I was listening, one of the questions I had was when we actually end this conversation and go back and give like recommendations, what are the energy we are sending out as to why somebody should volunteer, right? Like I said, it's written energy. When I say it's a duty, I can see a certain energy in me. When I say it's a very natural human process, then there's a certain energy in it. And then when I say it's right, there's a certain energy. When I say it's impact, there's a certain energy, right? I think it's important to ask, what does this group beyond words wanted energy to be when people read about volunteering, seva, business process, what the energy they get about why somebody should volunteer, what is the need for volunteering, why should somebody volunteer? And my personal kind of suggestion is to keep it, definitely move it slightly, hold it back from becoming more tangible than it is today. It is already becoming tangible is my perception. I think it's a very, very intangible process and transformation that happens everywhere within and outside. Maybe we should look at balancing the tangibility of it, because it's anyway feel like it's going a lot that side. Should we pull it back and say, hey, there's also a lot of intangible, subtle magic that happens that we can't even describe or can't even really put a quantity impact statement to it, right? I think second point, maybe going back to your question about Gen Z, I think it's very beautiful, right? I was seeing a report, don't remember the exact report name, but it definitely directionally, it feels like the youth are going to look for purpose more than ever now and in the future. There is a lot of chaos and people like youth are looking for something to hold on to. And I think just the idea of having somebody else to help gives them that like crutch to hold on to, say, now I have something to hold on to. Everything feels very shaky and chaotic and doesn't make sense. At least this makes sense to me, is a positive direction I'm seeing go. What is also, I think, not helping the direction fully is what I told before, that it's also becoming tangible. Everybody's seeking purpose, but then I want a certificate so that I can use it for my next career move, right? Like it is towards creating meaning and impact. Everybody wants to be part of it, but there is also a conflicting narrative of I also need to sit as transactional. Will that help me tomorrow for what I want to pursue? So it's a bit of, again, a bit of a dichotomy to hold. So like Abhishek's favorite thought of, can we hold both, right? Can we build the narrative of Gen Z are anyway going to move towards being more purpose centric? We will see more Gen Z youth wanting to add value, wanting to find purpose, wanting to find the crutch of something that makes sense and gives them meaning. How do we do that? How do we tap onto that moving energy in the direction while not making it transactional, while keeping it very like about themselves, about how it's just about them being human and not about the certificate or what they get back by serving somebody else. That's my perspective.
Thanks.
Are you finding? Sorry, I just had a question. So can I come in with a question, Abhishek?
Yeah, I was wondering, Jitin, if you want to respond to this and then come to the question, or can Rajni go?
I think Rajni, we should
Yeah,
just
it's a 1 second question, then maybe you can all respond. Are you finding this balance difficult to strike? I'm a trustee of CRY, and I must confess that it's not that I get too much face-to-face interaction with our volunteers, but I know that we attract a large volume of volunteers. And my sense is that people manage to keep their transactional side of their life in its place, and then enter into these seva and volunteering spaces where they can do things just for the joy of it. And I think that is what fulfills and enriches both ways. It's really a two-way kind of osmosis. So I just wanted to put that thought as a question.
Thanks. And perhaps the Indian psyche is well equipped to hold these paradoxes and be totally fine with inhibiting these multiple spaces with equal ease and elegance, maybe. Yeah. I wonder about that as well. Prabha, do you want to respond, or Jitin, you want to share?
I'll pass Abhishek. Jitin, your observations. Yeah.
Go for it,
Jitin. I have to respond to the can poverty be solved by volunteering. That I'm called to do that, and I think I think here I'm only repeating what Nipun Mehta from service-based phase, which is basically that who creates these, yes, there are structural challenges that exist because of which poverty and all the other problems exist, but these structures are created by humans. And the humans who have created those structures have created it because they are disconnected from each other. And what service does is connect human beings. And when service done right, that connection is restored and you feel connected to the, you feel one with everybody. And that kind of a human being cannot create a structure that is violent. And hence, the current paradigm will shift the moment human beings are able to connect with each other. And the way to connect is through service, is through that. So this whole this thing is what Nipun Mehta speaks about, and I really do believe in it, and I have been there. But my personal contribution to this whole thing would be what I have noticed on ground at the community level, which is basically that when we work with children on ground, what we notice is that the resources that is required for that child, there is the resources that the child requires to be able to transition them out of poverty is already existing in that community because of whatever structural challenges that is there. But that resource actually exists in the community itself, and the resource is not flowing. And the moment a small percentage of the young people in that community starts volunteering, they start connecting because they are connected to larger rest of the people in the community. Through those connections, the resources start flowing, and children come kind of flow, and through that, children come out of poverty. And so hence, in some way, when I was kind of saying that through service, through volunteering, it's only through volunteering that volunteering is the fastest way to transition people out of poverty, not end poverty structurally, but transition people out of poverty on one side. And today, more than ever, we can transition every child who is born into intergenerational poverty out of poverty, because the number of children who are born into intergenerational poverty is lesser than the other number. We are no longer a pyramid where the poorest is not the largest number. It is more like the poorest is actually a smaller number compared to the thing, which means that today the resources exist in the communities to transition every child who is born into extreme poverty to transition out of poverty. That resource exists, and the way to unlock that resource is through volunteering, which is how this thing kind of happens. But when that volunteering happens, there is an inner transformation that happens to humans who are responsible for the structures in the economy, and when that will lead to an overall change. So that is the stages of us getting out of the current paradigm, the current structure that we are in, is how I make sense of it. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it, but that's basically how I make sense of it.
Yeah, I'm going to pause that track because it's a very juicy track. But just to bring this back also to, what Jitin, you said in terms of volunteering done right. When I experience a connection with everybody that transcends the boundaries that I'm a part of. Like if I'm Samaj, volunteering done right is not exclusive to Samaj, but it's also to Sarkar and Bazaar. And how do we, and therefore I'm re-verifying that universality of seva, that is seva which, because I could also do seva saying that, exclusively seva for this group alone, right? And that is also a form of seva. But I think what I'm hearing or I'm re-verifying is seva in its spirit is seva, which is universal, right? Because when you said volunteering done right, to me, somehow I'm wondering, is exclusive volunteering done for only some, is that volunteering done right? Or is the spirit of universality, right? I'm just kind of holding that. So, because that's what enables the connections that we spoke about, right? And therefore that's what leads to transformation. So I was wondering, because Shalabh, your work also transcends a lot of the boxes that traditionally are there, boxes of age, boxes of corporate society, and so on. So just checking on when you define seva or when you say this is service, is there service to all? What's your sense on this?
Yeah. So as an organization, and as I think people who are trying to make this happen, we take that universality as a core principle. But when we work on the ground, when we work with institutional setups, if I can say so, they might have a more narrow viewpoint. They make that narrow point, they make that choice. When we work with individuals, it's quite possible that the thought has not gone to that level. The thought is more as a reaction, or more kind of just a passing thought. And so we have to pick that passing thought and that reaction and then connect to the universality. So I think at an individual level, it usually remains kind of, to some extent transactional. People do think about, that, okay, I want to do this. And let me go back to kind of, even, the example of CRY, for example, receiving, large number of volunteer applications. I have seen this, that, it's not just about the organization's mission and what they do. It's also about the brand. So brands attract, and this is the market today. This is society today. And so they attract and that's the first level. And the next level is actually that, people who are kind of initially kind of just reacting or just starting off, there is some transaction in mind. That transaction could be a certificate. The transaction could be, a social media post. The transaction could be a like button. The transaction could be that I have got skills and the other doesn't. So maybe I can transact those skills. I can benefit somebody else. More often than not, transaction is at the core of the initial demand coming from an individual or from an entity. To take it to the other, to make it jump or kind of, to make that experience right is our job or is our duty. That's how I would put it.
Beautiful. Thanks. Thanks a lot for that. On that note, Rajni, I wanted to come back to you on trusteeship also, because Vasudeva Kutumbakam, world's a family. And the expression of universality to me would be when it's not only all people, I would even say all entities, beings living all of life, right? And being in service as much as possible as trustees of the planet and so on. So just wanted to take what Chalab shared, that the entry point is a transaction. The intent is to move towards a universal sense of seva and service. Just want to check with ideas of trusteeship and how they kind of interplay with this whole idea of boundaries and exclusivity versus universality.
Sure. So the commonly understood way that trusteeship is commonly understood tends to see it as do-gooding, right? And as act of kindness, act of generosity, that you made so much extra profit, so you are giving it away as whatever, donation, charity. And to some extent, this is not wrong. I mean, this is also valid. But since the term trusteeship was made, I think, quite prominent by Gandhiji, his interest is not in this, not really, because his basic insight is that if the means by which you earned the profit were flawed, if the means by which you earned the profit involved exploitation or even unfairness, because there's a big spectrum from outright exploitation to different shades of unfairness, then it doesn't matter how much of the profit you give away. That's one. The other is, and I kind of alluded to this in the beginning, that see, no wealth is earned without context. And that context is generations upon generations, cultivating so many practices that we don't even think about because they're just around us all the time and we take them for granted. We don't realize, how much of life rests on them. For example, I'm told that at one point, Alvin Toffler, who wrote the famous book, Future Shock, used to go around, I don't know, at some point he was getting called to give talks to corporates. So he would ask them, have you ever calculated what would be the cost of toilet training your employees? Why? His point was that it's a function that mostly mothers perform. Very far down in that life history of that person, from the point when he or she is standing in front of you as a 25-year-old young professional. So this is what I mean by context. Therefore, no wealth is ever really private. And therefore, the more it is controlled and hoarded in a purely private manner, the more it further solidifies the structures of injustice and inequality, etc. And therefore, I respectfully disagree both with Nipun and with Jitin, because if their assumption was true, then the Bhakti movement should have made colonialism impossible. Because there were millions of people on this subcontinent who had a sense of ekakar. But they were swept away by the structures, by the guns of the East India Company, and the structures of taxation and other exploitative, modes of governance, which turned the country that was, we were not a country in the present sense of the word, but the subcontinent, which was, producing almost 1/3 of the world's manufactured goods, to abject poverty. So that, and now, of course, recently there's so much more research on this, that how many tens of millions of people, currently one count is saying 100 million, I haven't checked it out, were killed by the famines that were generated by that system. So I must say, I beg to not only disagree, but object to this claim that if people only sensed their sense of oneness with each other, things would change. That didn't stop Christianity from developing a political economy. What is the original message of Christ is nothing but that. But out of that came a political economy which took Christianity as the justification for colonialism and imperialism. So these are, I think this is a separate discussion.
Yes, it is a rich discussion.
So anyway, so trusteeship is meaningless if it doesn't challenge the structural injustices.
Yes, it is a rich and off the panel discussion, but I'm going to segue it back to the panel and maybe put it back to the panel that there is one part of volunteering which is like a no-brainer, right? Doing good for the society and it's there. But there is one part of volunteering which is closer to some kind of mischief making, right? And not mischief making in the naughty anarchist sense, but in the sense of active citizenship, in the sense of raising questions to power structures. And that part could actually be the kind of volunteering that influences structures also, because there is advocacy, and what I'm curious, because that is also a form of service to the nation, to the collective, that you're raising questions or that you're challenging structures. And I'm curious because that part seems like the little lojo garam hot part of the thing. You're touching it is a little harder. Holding on to the softer kind of seva is easier. And with reference to structures, is it seva or is it not seva then to even challenge these structures of oppression? There's a whole bunch of people doing that. Do we see that also as service to the collective, or do we see that? So I think that's kind of the question that was somehow coming to me. And Rajni, your smile.
Yes, I'll just take 1 minute. So let me put it this way. I have had the privilege of being a friend of Medha Patkar for now some 30 years. And I tell you that one of the most joyous aspects has been to be in a public place with Medha. Whether it is a train, whether it is a bus stand, whether it is any other kind of, gathering, even when she stood for that on the AAP ticket in Chembur, the kind of respect, the kind of admiration that she attracts. And everybody knows that she challenged the structure in a very profound way. Yes, it was a seva bhav because she was doing it because she couldn't bear to see millions of people being thrown out of their ancestral homes. But they also know that repeatedly she has taken on the structures of power. And so to me, this is a wonderful combination. And the last such incident happened just now, only 4 or 5 months ago, on a train journey. So I feel very enriched by knowing that this is there. It tells me something very powerful about our society. And there are many people who disagree with her. What should be the length of the dam? That is a very complicated matter. But that's not the point. They admire what she did and what she does.
And the recognition, the intuitive recognition of the spirit of sacrifice, right? Intuitively, which goes beyond the,
Abhishek, sacrifice to complicated baat hai. You can be selfless without being sacrificing, because usme uska kuch nahi tha bhai. Her home was not drowning, and yet out of, to extend yourself on behalf of others when you yourself are not endangered.
True. Yeah. Thanks for that. So I'll come to Prabha and then Jitin. Prabha, you wanted to share much earlier, so if that is okay. So yeah, go for it, Prabha.
Yeah, I was just going to probably do a +1 to Jitin and come back and put a voice out that volunteering can indeed solve problems that are any problem in this country, in this world. And we cannot validate that based on past examples, because examples will give us both sides of the story, right? Hence, what we need to think about is the potential of wanting to change any problem, what has happened in the past, because past is based on very limited, like what it is. If it's done right, what is the potential is what we should think, right? Maybe we didn't do it right in the past. Floods, Corona, COVID have all shown us that today the magnitude of the problem doesn't matter. Seva sense of being part of the solution has changed and moved mountains, literally solve problems that we could never have thought of we could solve structurally, right? So what I do want to share is that when we think of things like Seva and volunteering changing world problems, there's a lot of self-organizing that we cannot foresee, but it happens in a very magical way, right? So logically, if you think of it right now, can volunteering solve poverty? No. But can human beings together solve poverty? Yes. Will they self-organize? Yes. So that's my response. Yeah.
Wow, very, very succinct and very elegant, Prabha. Jitin's already smiling. Over to you, Jitin.
Sorry, I was listening to Prabha that I forgot what I wanted to speak about, but I think the way you create change is by fighting the system. I think what's happening with the Black Lives Matters movement that is happening in the US, and there are two sides, and there is a one with the power and the one that is powerless, and then there is conflict, and the assumption is that the conflict will lead to change. I just don't believe in that anymore. I feel it's the whole eye for an eye, the whole thing. But really, at a very practical, at a very thing level, I really genuinely don't believe that the way change is going to happen is by us forcing the structural change to happen. My sense is that, like let's say the Bhakti movement did not touch the heart of the Britishers, would be my understanding of it. That is, only when the oppressor's heart is touched can you actually say that the transformation is complete. And hence, volunteering done right, according to me, is when you are able to touch the heart and and reconnect. So in a lot of ways, the job of volunteering is to connect. Until that connection is not made, you will not, it probably is not volunteering, or you have not volunteered deep enough in a lot of ways. So that's the space that I'm coming.
This is a slippery slope, actually. So I don't want to open the debate because there are both sides. I see both sides there, because I hear you, Jitin, when you say, well, if done right, volunteering would be a society-wide transformational force. And I also hear you, Rajni, when you say that, will it ever be done right, in the sense that if it would be done right in the past, would this happen? And will it ever touch the structure or become even a justification, right? At sometimes So yeah, sorry, Rajni, you wanted to share
No,
some.
I want to give an example to validate what Jitin is saying. That there we live in a time when there is also proof of what he is saying. And I'll tell you that is the best example I can immediately think of is, companies that had very bad records of doing terrible things in various places. Segments of their shareholders formed volunteer groups. Or in some cases, an entity like Greenpeace, this is a famous case, I think went out and invested in shares of BP, British Petroleum, because that gave them the right to go to the shareholder meetings and demand changes on what the company was doing. So here is, to me, an example of when volunteering energy, finds a wedge in the system to at least move the needle marginally or more significantly in how that system operates. So I just wanted to offer that as an example. But this only happens because the volunteering energy is at least 180 degrees. Not just 360 degrees. And I think but to also, in all honesty, express my critique, I think the problem, according to my understanding, with this approach is that it is confusing domains. I think human beings, by definition, I mean, that's the experience of the human condition, is that this whole inner journey and our need to seek the infinite is like a dimension that has its own sanctity, has its own integrity. And this realm of Maya, in which the whole GDP, companies, profit, exploitation, all that is happening, is another domain. And I think our mythic traditions have excelled in understanding what are the complications and how these domains do and don't overlap. That is why the Lord himself, Krishna, has to preside over a self-destructive war. And when that is over, he has to go away and in some years' time, bear witness to his clan self-destructing. The Yadavas destroyed themselves. Okay. So I'm simply appealing that we appreciate this complexity of the human condition. And knowing this complexity with great gusto and joy, we engage in what we can do. And here I will quote Ripon Kapoor: I must do what I can do. Ripon Kapoor is the founder of CRY.
Beautiful. I think on that note, also it's a good time to start moving into what are things we can do to build this culture of seva. And I'm actually very tempted to come back to you, Rajni, before going around the circle, because what you said was interesting, that there is the infinite and then there is the Maya. And I'm curious where you're locating seva in that. Which dimension do you locate it in? Is it an access to the infinite dimension located in Maya? Or is it doing what we can in the Maya dimension and leaving the infinite to Bhakti? Or I was curious, since you opened it up, and therefore from there, if you could move into the hence what would create a culture of seva. So if you can.
Give you my favorite example of the moment. How I'm assuming everybody knows who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was, right? He is living out there in what is now Bengal and Orissa. He is, by the way, a contemporary, I think, of Akbar. And he travels all the way from there to come and see the Vrindavan, that, all the Bhakti song, I mean, all the Bhakti tradition, imagination. And he comes and he finds there is no contemporary Vrindavan. He goes about recruiting 5 disciples who then go on to, in a sense, do all kinds of activity, which led finally to Akbar granting masses of land, which then became what is today Vrindavan. I mean, this story is told by Srivats Goswami in his Ahimsa conversation. So I'm giving this as an example. Ramakrishna Paramhans le lo, acha chhod do. I mean, if you think that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is too far in the past, we can't relate to him, just think of Ramakrishna Paramhans. He never, he went up to Banaras and Vrindavan, but he didn't move out of the temple complex. But look at how he inspires these disciples, that they not only, of course, prioritize. There's no confusion, I think, in any of the disciples that Atma Gyan nahi hoga to kuch nahi hoga. Yes. But they are not sitting in a cave and doing Atma Gyan. They are engaging with the task of improving real lives in real time. And then you have Vivekanand who doesn't just do that in, health and education and cleans whatever, hygiene or anything. He goes and, lagaus one jhanda on the global stage, which is it's a cultural, political, everything jhanda. So this kind of, these are the examples that come to my mind.
Of coming together in a way of,
which to me are a huge inspiration for the Seva Bhav, which is, of course, firstly, it has to be anchored. Without the anchor, kuch nahi hoga. But it's very multidimensionally aspirational.
Beautiful.
And very rich. If we have time at the end, one more story, but at the end, if
okay, I'll come. I will see if I can come back for closing comment. But I think, I hear you. I think some very rich examples, and you're taking Seva to a much, much more multidimensional space, and just bringing this back now from the Ramakrishna Paramhans and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to more kind of contemporary times, and back to the question of how do we not only build a culture, but also evoke that we stand on these traditions, we stand on this kind of a cultural experience. I think to me that also gets evoked, but also located contemporarily. So I was wondering, Chalab, if I could come to you to kind of bring this into a contemporary context, because what I heard you say was also very grounded, very pragmatic, very real in today's times and moments. And so how do we build conditions for Seva? How do we cultivate a culture of Seva standing in the roots that we have? What would be a pathway, as somebody who, I'm sure you think a lot about the future, I'm sure you have a lot of dreams. So if you'd had to lay out a pathway on what would be your recommendations of creating a culture of Seva?
So I feel we have to revisit why it has gone, if not missing, at least why was there a dip? Why is there a dip? Why is it picking up now? And I feel like, I always felt that we have to really invest in creating an infrastructure of volunteering in the country. And so what do I mean by infrastructure of volunteering? It requires everything, right from the right policy environment, which supports kind of, volunteering, which recognizes volunteering. So I'll take a very simple thing, volunteering was always a part of the Ministry of Youth Affairs, Youth and Sports, right? So we're automatically equating volunteering only to the youth and sports. So we kind of, excluding a large segment of a population by saying that these are not the guys who will volunteer. So just from there, and I have been part of, countries and discussions where I've seen that, there are much better legal frameworks for volunteering that ensure that, that the system, the government is kind of primed to enhance volunteering. So beginning from there, to actually every actor in the society, whether it's a university or it is the workplace or it is the family place, are we giving Seva or volunteering enough space? So that is one element. And then I think if I look at 25 years back, if somebody wanted to volunteer, it was difficult to find where would I go and what would I do, unless you were connected to some local group or maybe a temple or maybe some kind of spiritual group that you were a part of, or a rural village community. Interestingly, the village communities actually harbor that sense of service in the community really well. So when the people get dislodged from their original communities and become part of this large metropolitan new age economy, is when that sense of distance is there, when you stop probably giving back and stop connecting. So this other aspect is about investing in a sense of service very early on, at a very early age. So we've started saying that volunteering doesn't have to necessarily wait till you are 14 or till you are 18. It can happen when you are 6. It can happen when you are 8. It may not be called volunteering. It may not be called service. It may not be called seva. It can be called whatever. But it has to, that sense has to be created from there. That taste has to, come right from there, and then it will probably grow on. One of the other things I believe is that is recognition for volunteers and volunteering. So I Volunteer Awards was created as an initiative because we believe that after first 10 years of of existing as I Volunteer, we realized that the biggest challenge that we face is because there's no recognition for volunteering. And what do you mean recognition for volunteering? If you go out and volunteer, are you creating value for the society? Is that measured? Is that reported? Is that encouraged? Are you creating value for yourself? Is that encouraged? Is that supported? So are you an actor, an influencer that people feel is a positive or a positive person in the society? So are we creating that recognition? So I feel that creating those policy structures, creating those going to each of the institutional setups in the society, and creating an overarching sense of recognition are the key things that will actually go about in creating a positive ecosystem for volunteering to flourish. As part of all of this, I also feel that there's this onus we have in terms of measuring and reporting and analyzing, which is again where we, if you look at pure data, we just don't find data on volunteering in the country. And if there is no data, then there is no way we'll understand what are the levers, what can we move, what can we change in order to make things happen. And if we're investing in something, what returns are we getting? Because end of the day, in the modern society, there are budgets, there are government systems, there are people, there are selfish, not that selfish, but kind of requirements which are there, and we need to make a point. Unless we make a point that it is going to be beneficial to the country, to the individual, to the family, to the student, to the company, it won't really go anywhere. So, and that will come only from measuring, reporting, and analyzing. So I feel that some of I went a little all over, but I thought
it's a bunch of no, not at all. These are a bunch of very important and concrete recommendations, and I think they complement what you said, Rajni, because I almost felt like the spiritual and the grounded together kind of set the context. I wanted to come to Prabha next on this whole thing, because I think one of the things that was getting evoked for me was that everyday small actions and hyper local actions also constitute seva, right? And knowing Bhumi, the projects it does, pin code project, or very hyper local volunteering, right? And volunteering by ordinary citizens. So I was curious that let's say that let's say a bunch of the recommendations Shalabh said happen, and the context and the rootedness that Rajni referred to happens. People are looking at seva from a much deeper space. Just locating it into very hyper local communities. What are you seeing? What are your recommendations on hyper localizing volunteering, and what would that look like at the level of a building or a block?
Sure. I think it largely just again goes back to the idea that it is already there. Like if I take one street in Chennai, can the street solve its own problem? Is there potential? Yes. Is there an intent? Yes. Is there a seed for the change to happen? Yes. So in essence, I think what we're creating is not necessarily something that will feel like a force. What we're creating will feel like a very gentle nudge. You need force when you're asking people to do something they don't want to do, or something they don't know fully yet, right? But because seva and volunteering has anyway innate like things that come to people naturally, even when it comes to hyperlocal systems, what we need is just a gentle reminder that, hey, this problem is there. And I think today, because of all the noise, people don't see the problem, right? Maybe a first good step for all of us in the space for creating that ecosystem is to say, can we get every Indian to know the problems to start with, right? Because when everybody sees there's a problem which they may not be aware of or they're not open to, I think that moment, then they start acting because it's natural. You don't need to go and tell people act. They're not acting because they either don't see the problem yet or they don't see that they can be a part of the solution. So starting response would be to say, how can everybody know their local problems and actually empathetically, emotionally connect and see it, like really see it, that somebody is suffering, right? And then once that part is done, everybody sees there is suffering near me, around me, in my street, in my area, then some people will naturally have enough inner momentum to do on their own. They'll go and start doing by themselves what they could do on their own. For people who are having a lot more inertia to start, then the ecosystem needs to create simpler first step opportunities to start acting, right? I saw the problem, I want to act today, but I'm a bit like, I still have inertia. I don't think I'm ready yet. I don't know how to act. Then a Bhumi or I want or Mark can say, great, it looks like you already know the problem. You want to act. Can you start by teaching one class tomorrow? Or can you start by cleaning like the street outside you today, right? Then I think volunteering, everybody will agree is like that. Is that you just put the first gear, then it does anyway goes to fifth gear. You can't stop people, right? I think they just need to experience it once or for a certain amount of time, then they just go deep into it. My second solution would be to get people to start taste volunteering once and create that platform opportunity to taste one. Then I think magic anyway happens in a very self-organized way. Yeah.
Just taste volunteering once. Jidil, I'm going to use a little bit of my contextual knowledge about MAD and come in on this whole idea of child at the center of a community and literally an excuse around which a community could organize and even challenge larger systemic causes. And I'd love to have you share. I've heard this so many times from you, but each time I hear it, it refreshes me, right? The dream, because somehow to me that marries a lot of what's already shared. It marries the spiritual, the policy, the hyper local. So if you would like to share that thinking that you have about child at the center of communities and how the community can align.
Yeah, I think in this concept, one of the things I'm realizing that most of this is not my thinking. Somebody else has already thought about it, and I've just gone. I've been influenced by it, and I've been trying to practice it and seeing if it's kind of landing. Is it making sense in the real world? So this is from this idea called Children's Fire, which is primarily by I think the chiefs of the indigenous communities in North America. When all their chiefs used to come together, the one question, that they used to have a children's fire at the middle of it, where basically they used to make an oath which said that any decision that I make that we make collectively here will not harm children 7 generations from today. And I personally was extremely affected by it because the idea that the moment you're kind of keeping, it's almost like the Gandhi's talisman in some way, which is that it's an interesting talisman where the moment you're saying you cannot harm a child, decision cannot harm a child 7 generations from now, that has an environmental angle to it, that has like, it basically covers all bases and not just a child-centric aspect to the whole thing. And I think where it is connecting in some way to the conversation that we are having so far is from the angle of if you choose anything and you really work on that deeply to change that one thing, everything else has to change for that to fully transform. And children are there's probably children, but like I feel like if you want to change any aspect of society, you have to change all aspects of society, and that change is inevitable. So it doesn't matter where you start probably, but at the end of the day, the change will, like everything has to change.
Great. So, and hopefully the interconnectedness shall come in and that shall happen. So my plan from here on was to go for closing comments in the same sequence that we did openings. But before that, I also wanted to take a few minutes just to see if the audience wants to key in some questions in the chat box. We may not have time to do individual Q&As with individual panelists. But I was also hoping to have some informal time, maybe the last 5-10 minutes, after we formally close the panel can be just a general chill out, a general checkout, unwinding from the panel. This becomes too abrupt. Like you were on the panel, then you were off. It didn't even get to say hi, hello, and have some jo bakaiti kehte hain, the general chit chat. So I thought maybe if I can salvage the last 10 minutes for some informal chit chat after formally closing the panel. But meanwhile, I'll also ask if any audience members have any questions. They could put those into the chat. If they're for specific panelists, we could also go back to them and just have them to respond to specific question. But let's use the chat box. I think that'll be my request. So this is also another good time to take a pause, actually, because we've explored a wide range, a diverse landscape. And so maybe a pause, and then I could come to you, Rajni, after the pause, to just having heard all this and having shared all this, where are you? And from this conversation, what's alive for you? What would you like to reaffirm or share? What opened up for you, and maybe something of that sort as closing comments. Akshay, meanwhile, has asked a question that in CSR policy, corporates don't spend on volunteering, so can C20 push policymakers to change policy? So I'll park that question, and maybe Shalabh would have some thoughts on it, or others also. But yeah, so maybe a short pause, and then maybe Rajni, we could start with you.
So I feel very enriched, and I'm delighted to learn so much from all of you about the things that people are struggling with on the ground. What I sensed was that it is very difficult to challenge the dominant terminologies. That I mean, I do empathize with that. I mean, I say this in like a third person, because I don't have to run an organization, and I don't have to be out there in the jaddo-jahad of grappling with things. So in a sense, I think my closing thought is that, given that once we acknowledge that, yes, it is very difficult to challenge or to move away from the dominant discourse, we can't move away from it. But I am simply thinking that maybe it is still good to keep challenging it anywhere and everywhere that it is possible. And I'll close with an example. So see, for the person who volunteers, it is that, okay, ye mera ek tinka maine rakha, which is very precious. And that's that bhav, that reality has been with us, I think, from long before we look like this, for lakhs of years. And I'll tell you this, you all heard the story, right? About this little girl who was walking down the beach, and lots of starfish have washed ashore because of some tidal something. And so she starts picking up one starfish and putting it back in the water. And the mother finally says, but darling, you can't help all of them. And she says, no, you can't make a difference. You won't make a difference, the mother says. And the little girl looks at the starfish that's in her hand and says, it will make a difference to this, before she puts it back. Now, why does this story stay with me? Because I read it in the writings of Amy Dominy. Amy Dominy started out in life as a stockbroker, just like any other stockbroker, making money for people, making money for herself. Till one day she finally realized that, she was calling up people and asking them to buy a stock because she had information that that company was going to get a very big military contract. And she said, what am I doing? I'm encouraging my clients to make money out of war. And she switched. And she didn't switch by leaving the job. She switched by setting up what is now known as socially responsible investing. She created lots of institutions which made it possible for ordinary people to make a moral choice in the companies they invest in. Look her up, Amy Domini. And so in so Amy has done well. She's known as the founding mom of socially responsible investing. Sorry, I'm hoping somebody will get that phone. But to me, this is an example of how what was actually a volunteering spirit and aspiration made a structural input. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajni. Om, meanwhile, has also asked a question saying volunteering as a survival strategy for poor in rural India, helping each other, and is it diminishing? So I'll park that also. Over to you, Jitin, for your final thoughts. What are you left with?
I'm left with two thoughts. The first one is definitely around the structural conversations that we were having so far, which is that are the structures still changing? Because where do these structural challenges come from in the first place? Are we saying that it is coming from the human psyche, which is, human beings are fundamentally a particular way, and hence any systems that they create will structurally have the haves and the have-nots. Is that where we are talking about it, or is a structural difference we are talking about, like more from a space of scarcity and abundance, which is that in a world where there is always scarcity of resources, there will be a need for structures, and these structures will cause resources to flow in a particular manner, and that will kind of lead to these situations. And the question that's alive for me is how much of that structure itself is changeable or is changing. I come from a lot of my friends are deep in the technology space, where they genuinely believe that the scarcity is just a phase of human life, and we are going to move into abundance, especially once energy has been figured out, the level of abundance that which human beings will experience. Experience will be fundamentally different. In which case, will the structures change? Will we have a fundamentally different structured singularity movement? Right? Like now with AI, there is a whole conversation about when intelligence becomes abundant, how will that change the structures of the society that we are operating in? And hence, for me, I do understand that things like poverty, there is a structural angle to it, but are those structures themselves shifting? Is a question that's very alive for me, and how much of it is shiftable is very alive for me, especially in our times, especially in current times. Second, I was just thinking about it, but I don't know if I mentioned around 12 to 13 years back when I started. The first 2-3 years after I started MAD, I visited I Volunteer office, and I think I met Shalabh or another founder of another person from I Volunteer, and he made a very clear conversation with me at that point of time, which was actually quite useful. Where he said that, Jitin, you can either be a volunteering organization or you can be a programmatic organization. You can't be both. And my answer at that point of time was very straightforward. And then I'm a programmatic organization because I care about children and I want to make a difference in children's lives. And volunteering is just a tool to get there. And I thought at some point in my life that probably we'll kind of transition out of volunteering and get into other aspects of it. So volunteering is not, I'm not at my core. If I have to fight, I won't fight for volunteering. I will fight for children. But unfortunately, where I have reached after 16 years of working with children and understanding what does it take. So when we started, the simple idea was that children who's coming into childcare institutions, their children should not end up in a childcare institution again. And we are going to do whatever it takes to enable that to happen. And after 16 years of working in the space, the one thing that's becoming increasingly clear that we are all doubling down on as an organization is that only through volunteering can we enable children to transition out of poverty, because somewhere in the process we realized that okay, children are ending up in childcare institutions because of poverty and because of intergenerational poverty. And if we have to solve it, it will basically be, how do we get people out of intergenerational poverty into intergenerational wealth, and what is the fastest way to get there? And we really cannot find a way that is faster than volunteering. And that process of volunteering that happens creates some changes in the human psyche, which is a structural change in the human psyche, which then creates space for more structural changes to happen in the country and hopefully globally. So that's how we are making sense of it. And that's where that's how making sense. That's it.
Thanks, Jitin. May the transformation of inner structures lead also to transformation of outer structures. Chalab, over to you. And also, if the CSR policy question, if you can touch a bit on saying, is that worth nudging for?
Sure.
Just your closing reflections on this conversation.
Okay. Jitin, thanks for jogging the memory. A lot of times, you make statements that you don't know, you don't realize what would they mean 15 years from then. So yes, I was the founder. I remember that. That's typically my style of saying things. So I didn't remember the conversation, but I remember that I can relate to. This is my style. I was reflecting on this entire conversation. I was thinking, when I entered this conversation, it was about volunteering and seva, or seva and volunteering, or seva as service and volunteering. Terms that we use interchangeably. And I was probably thinking, at the end of it, I'm thinking more from volunteering to seva. So I realized, like you were saying, that we're running organizations. We're with the jaddojahed every day of in which we got bogged down by operational things which connect us to a purpose, but there is a lot of operationals in it, and therefore I think beyond the stated mission or purpose, there is little time to connect with the higher realms of trusteeship, service, faith, lakhs of years. So for me, it is for me, the personal takeaway is to kind of look at that as well, and how does it, because we're already moving one step into kind of inner transformation, but that is not complete without we understand what does that mean in the larger universe. So that's something for me to take away and connect with. I need to learn more out there. Specifically, the question on this thing, clear answer. I was part of the discussion that was happening at a certain committee on kind of including volunteering, making volunteering as a part of CSR, and I kind of I opposed it because and not just me, there were 2 other NGO members who also opposed it, because it's directly a question of the value. The CSR policy is fixed on 2% of the profit. There's a clear monetary value attached to it. In volunteering, there's no clear way of actually attaching the monetary value of volunteering. And in absence of that clarity, I think the business sector would make use of it more so than the society would benefit. Volunteering done at a lower value will be costed at a higher value, and so therefore we are not prepared to have that included. What we need to do is 2 things. Employee volunteering kind of it's what I was referring at. So volunteering as a subject should be kind of supported ideally, but employee volunteering as a costed or a value time being taken away from the 2% is something we're not there yet. We need to prepare ourselves better.
Preparation better is definitely good. It's a good idea and good thought. Prabha, you get to go finally and to summarize this whole, your views, your reflection. Also, some questions around rural volunteering have come in, where there's already been migration, or there has been a culture of volunteering that's diminishing. And maybe also from Bhumi's extensive experience of working in urban but also semi-urban areas where Bhumi extends. Maybe if you can throw some light on that. And of course, your own closing comments, reflections.
Sure. For the rural part, I think that's something that we've all seen, that spirit of volunteering or giving may have diluted a bit. But again, we are also seeing examples of that bright spots happening in other places in the country, right? And there are a lot of some of my colleagues from a Teach for India journey are right now working with communities in rural Kadalur. Like they're having a lot of volunteers go and engage there. So it's just that some things are fizzling out. But I think if we can just understand what are happening in the bright spots where it is probably where it was or where it is doing even better, maybe we could just replicate that. Is my quick thought. But again, the intent could definitely be there. We just need to create that platform for that wanting to happen in rural areas also. Overall, in terms of what am I feeling, what am I taking away, as I thought of everyone's responses, I was just thinking that there's a lot of maybe because volunteering is something so organic, maybe we don't need to worry a lot about direction, right? We don't need to worry a lot about direction, rigor, structure, and focus a lot more on it just happening, right? Like, can we put an like aspirational dream to say one day we'll all just work towards every Indian volunteering for 1 day in a week, just 2 hours in a week, and see what magic happens, and just trust that volunteering is a lot of self-organizing. Volunteering is a lot of intangible. Volunteering is a lot of no for. Like it's just magical, right? Volunteering means you cannot. That person does it on their own. How can any force create that environment, right? It's a very organic process. Like people facilitating can have a lot of rigor and systems, but when you go to the actual person on that day showing kindness or volunteering, that process is not a structured rigor process. It's a very natural human-centric process and a very heart-driven process, right? So walking away thinking, how can this country create a huge force for volunteering to be promoted and people to start volunteering, but not have a lot of direction around how does it all add up? Is there rigor and is it, or maybe kind of leave that to the self-organizing power, leave it to people's power, leave it that magic part maybe not very structured, and just focus a lot more on how do we just get everyone to start acting and allow for self-organizing to happen. Yeah, walking away with that.
Thank you, Prabha. Yeah, I think self-organizing and organic evolution. Again, nature keeps getting evoked for me, right from our innate nature of helping to just the natural cycles that got referred to also, where every time humanity has tapped into this power and yeah, and our own, like you said, nature self-organizing. I think that's what I'm left with. And I loved, I think where I am is also the joy of a meandering conversation. Our intention was precisely not to box the conversation and have everybody expound on the boundaries we set, but really to throw open and see where all it meanders, because perhaps we may discover new territories which are not in our mental models. And I think so for me, the joy was traveling to places we didn't know. I think that's how we love it at Wisdom Tree, the collective wisdom which takes us at unknown places. And that's the freshest, the most exciting thing. So lots of gratitude to all four of you for sharing so much from your experiences, for holding the divergences, amplifying the convergences. And from our end, the commitment is that the essence of this can be consolidated, will add up to what we finally put out as the essence of these consultations. So thanks a lot for that. And thanks to the track, the Seva Volunteering and Philanthropy track also for enabling this consultation to happen. And with that, I'm going to pause the conversation, and we still have about 5 minutes there. So good time to pause the live, good time to pause the recording, good time to turn on cameras, say hello to everyone.